Picture this. You're stuck in a world where everyone else is playing by the rules, grinding for hours just to land a single decent hit, while you're out here breaking the entire combat system with abilities that make physics cry. Today we're diving into a manhwa that asks one simple question. What happens when someone gets powers so broken that the universe itself starts filing complaints? Our story begins with Jin Woo, a guy whose life was about as exciting as watching paint dry in slow motion. He worked a dead-end job, lived in a cramped apartment, and had the combat skills of a soggy piece of bread. But fate, being the twisted comedian it is, decided to throw him the biggest curveball imaginable. One moment he's walking home from another soul-crushing day at work, and the next moment he's staring at a glowing blue screen floating in front of his face like some cosmic prank. The system message was simple enough to make him question his sanity. Welcome to the infinite combat system. Your tutorial begins now. Jin Woo blinked twice, rubbed his eyes, and even slapped himself for good measure. The screen didn't disappear. Instead, it cheerfully informed him that he'd been selected as the sole user of a combat system that operated on principles so broken they made cheat codes look balanced. The first thing Jin Woo noticed was the skill tree. Most people get maybe 3 or 4 abilities if they're lucky. Jin Woo got handed a skill list that looked like someone had photocopied every fighting game manual ever created and decided to give him access to all of it. Martial arts techniques from ancient civilizations, modern combat systems, magical abilities that defied every law of science, and weapon masteries that covered everything from swords to interdimensional bazookas. But here's where things got absolutely ridiculous. Every single ability had 0 cooldown. 0. While other awakened humans were carefully managing their stamina and waiting for their skills to recharge, Jin Woo could spam his most powerful techniques like he was playing a broken arcade game with infinite quarters. The system didn't just bend the rules. It took the rulebook, set it on fire, and used the ashes as seasoning for its morning coffee. Jin Woo's first real test came when a dimensional rift opened up right in the middle of downtown Seoul. These rifts were bad news. They spewed out monsters that treated human cities like all-you-can-eat buffets. The government response team arrived with their standard protocol. Form a perimeter, call in the A-rank hunters, evacuate civilians, and pray nobody important gets eaten. Jin Woo, meanwhile, walked straight towards the rift like he was heading to the corner store for milk. The first monster that crawled out was a crimson ogre, level 45. With muscles that looked like they'd been sculpted by someone who thought subtlety was a foreign curse word. This thing had claws that could slice through tank armor and a roar that shattered windows 3 blocks away. The government team started setting up their heavy artillery. Jin Woo cracked his knuckles and activated his first skill, Lightning Dash. In the blink of an eye, he covered the distance between himself and the ogre, leaving a trail of crackling electricity in his wake. But instead of stopping there, he immediately chained it into Phantom Strike, a technique that created multiple after images to confuse enemies. Then came Crushing Blow, a martial arts technique that concentrated all his strength into a single devastating punch. The entire combo took less than 2 seconds. The ogre, which should have been able to tank hits, from military-grade weapons exploded into pixels like a badly programmed video game enemy. The government team stood there with their mouths hanging open like they'd just watched someone defeat a final boss with a rubber chicken. Jinwoo dusted off his hands and looked at the rift, which was still spewing out monsters like a broken vending machine. More ogres emerged, followed by shadow wolves with eyes like burning coals, and finally a rift guardian that stood 30 feet tall and looked like it had been designed by someone with serious anger management issues. Most people would have called for backup, formed a strategy, maybe written a will. Jinwoo activated Berserker mode, which multiplied all his stats by 10, then immediately stacked it with elemental infusion, wrapping his entire body in flames, ice, and lightning simultaneously. The system cheerfully informed him that this combination should have killed him instantly from magical overload. Instead, his health bar didn't even flicker. What followed wasn't a fight. It was a demonstration in how to completely break a combat system. Jinwoo moved like he was conducting a symphony of destruction, chaining abilities together in combinations that shouldn't have been possible. He'd use teleport to appear behind an enemy, follow up with time dilation to slow everything around him, then unleash a barrage of techniques that hit with the force of natural disasters. Shadow Clone created dozens of copies that fought independently. Each clone could use the same abilities as Jinwoo, with the same 0 cooldown restriction. Gravity manipulation let him control the battlefield like he was rearranging furniture. Energy blast techniques that could level city blocks fired off like he was playing a bullet hell game on easy mode. The monsters didn't stand a chance. The Rift Guardian, which was supposed to be a boss-level threat requiring an entire team of S-rank hunters, got comboed to death in under 30 seconds. Jinwoo hit it with a combination of abilities that included teleporting attacks, elemental damage, time manipulation, and finishing moves that created explosions visible from orbit. When the smoke cleared, the dimensional rift had been completely destabilized and collapsed in on itself. The street looked like a construction site after a particularly enthusiastic demolition crew had gotten creative with their explosives. Jinwoo stood in the middle of it all, not even breathing hard, while his health and mana bars sat at 100% like they'd never been touched. The government response team approached him like he was a walking nuclear weapon that might go off if they looked at him wrong. Their equipment couldn't even measure his power level. Their detection devices just displayed error messages and question marks. One of the senior officials asked him what rank hunter he was, and Jinwoo honestly replied that he had no idea. That's when the system decided to be helpful and displayed his stats for everyone to see. The numbers were so ridiculous that several people thought their equipment was malfunctioning. Strength, speed, endurance, magical power, all maxed out at values that shouldn't have been possible for a human being. But the real kicker was his skill list, which scrolled on for so long that people got tired of reading it and gave up. News of the incident spread faster than gossip in a small town. Within hours, every major guild, government agency, and hunter organization on the planet was trying to figure out who Jinwoo was and how he'd gotten so powerful. The video footage looked like someone had edited together clips from every action movie ever made and cranked the special effects budget to 11. Jin Woo, meanwhile, went home to his tiny apartment and tried to process what had just happened to his life. The system helpfully informed him that he'd completed his first combat tutorial and unlocked even more abilities. His skill tree had grown so large that it required its own navigation system. He now had access to techniques from martial arts masters, magical spells from ancient civilizations, modern combat training, and abilities that seemed to come from entirely different dimensions. The apartment felt different now. Everything seemed smaller, more fragile, like it was made of paper instead of concrete and steel. Jin Woo realized that his perception of the world had fundamentally changed. He could see the structural weaknesses in the building, sense the movement of every person within a 5-block radius, and his reflexes were so enhanced that time seemed to move in slow motion. His phone started ringing. News reporters, government officials, guild representatives, everyone wanted to talk to the mysterious hunter who'd single-handedly cleared a dimensional rift that should have required an entire army. Jin Woo let it go to voicemail. He wasn't ready to deal with the outside world yet. He needed time to understand what he'd become and what it meant for his future. The system, ever helpful, provided him with a comprehensive analysis of his new situation. He was now classified as a singular entity, the only known user of the infinite combat system. His power level was listed as unmeasurable, which was apparently a technical term, meaning that he'd broken the scale they used to rank hunters. The system recommended that he keep a low profile until he'd fully adapted to his new abilities. Fat chance of that happening. Jin Woo's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The message was simple but ominous. "We know who you are. Meet us at the abandoned warehouse district tomorrow at midnight. Come alone. Failure to comply will result in consequences for everyone you care about." Jin Woo stared at the message and felt something cold settle in his stomach. His new powers came with new responsibilities and apparently new enemies. The system chimed softly and informed him that he triggered a new questline. The real game was just beginning. The warehouse district at midnight looked like the set of every low-budget thriller movie ever made. Broken streetlights cast uneven shadows, abandoned buildings loomed like concrete tombstones, and the air carried that special blend of rust, decay, and impending violence that screamed bad life choices. Jin Woo arrived exactly on time because apparently, even when you can break reality with your bare hands, punctuality still matters. 3 figures emerged from the shadows like they'd been practicing their dramatic entrances in front of a mirror. The leader was a woman in her 30s with silver hair and eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. Her companions flanked her with the kind of coordinated movement that suggested they'd done this dance before. Professional killers, Jin Woo realized, the sort of people who made other people disappear without leaving forwarding addresses. The woman introduced herself as Arya, representative of something called the Balance Council. Jin Woo had never heard of them, which apparently was the point. They operated in the shadows, keeping the supernatural world from spiraling into complete chaos. Think of them as cosmic middle management, with a license to kill and a really bad attitude about paperwork. Arya explained their situation with the kind of clinical detachment usually reserved for reading grocery lists. Jinwoo's existence violated fundamental laws that governed awakened abilities. His zero cooldown system was creating ripple effects across dimensions. Other awakened individuals were starting to experience power fluctuations. Reality itself was beginning to hiccup around him like a computer trying to run software it wasn't designed for. The council's solution was elegantly simple. Jinwoo needed to die. Nothing personal, they assured him, just cosmic housekeeping. His death would restore the natural order and prevent what they called a cascade failure, which sounded like the kind of thing that would make the apocalypse look like a minor inconvenience. Jinwoo listened politely to their presentation, then asked a single question that made Arya's confident expression waver. What if he refused? The answer came in the form of combat, because apparently diplomatic immunity didn't extend to reality-breaking anomalies. Arya moved first, her body erupting into silver flames as she activated what looked like an advanced pyrokinetic ability. Her companions split left and right, one wielding shadows like solid weapons, while the other seemed to bend space around himself. These weren't street-level thugs. They were elite operatives with abilities that could level city blocks. Jinwoo activated time dilation and watched the world slow to a crawl. Arya's flames moved like thick honey. Her companion's attacks telegraphed so clearly he could have written a detailed analysis while dodging them. He stepped sideways, letting the shadow weapons pass harmlessly through empty air, then countered with a combination that redefined the concept of overkill. Phantom Step let him create afterimages that confused his enemies' targeting systems. Lightning Fist delivered electrical damage that bypassed conventional defenses. Gravity Slam pulled all three attackers into a localized gravitational well that crushed concrete and twisted metal. The entire exchange lasted maybe 3 seconds in real time. But Jinwoo managed to fit in approximately 17 different techniques. When the dust settled, Arya and her team were down but not dead. Jinwoo had pulled his punches, partly for mercy and partly because he was curious about this balance council. Arya struggled to her feet, silver blood trickling from a dozen wounds, and looked at him with something approaching respect, mixed with existential terror. She admitted they'd underestimated him. The council's intelligence suggested he was powerful, but still bound by conventional limitations. What they'd just witnessed violated every principle they understood about combat abilities. Jinwoo had chained techniques that should have required hours of cooldown periods, maintained multiple enhancement effects simultaneously, and done it all while barely breaking a sweat. Jinwoo helped her stand because apparently being a reality-breaking anomaly didn't excuse basic courtesy. He explained that he hadn't asked for these abilities and wasn't particularly interested in destroying the universe. He just wanted to live his life without people trying to murder him every few days. Arya found this reasonable but pointed out that his very existence was causing problems whether he intended it or not. The system chose that moment to provide an update that made everyone's night significantly more complicated. A new dimensional rift had opened across the city, but this one was different. Instead of monsters, it was bleeding through what the system classified as void entities, creatures from a dimension where the laws of physics had apparently given up and gone home. These things didn't just kill people. They erased them from existence so completely that even memories of the victims began to fade. The city's population was dropping by the thousands, and nobody could remember who was missing. It was reality-level deletion with no save file. Arya's expression shifted from resignation to alarm as her communication device started screaming warnings about the void incursion. This wasn't a coincidence, she explained. Jinwoo's power spikes were creating weak points in dimensional barriers. His very existence was attracting attention from entities that viewed reality as an inconvenient suggestion. The choice became clear with a kind of brutal simplicity that made philosophers cry. Jinwoo could let the Balance Council eliminate him, potentially saving the universe, but definitely ending his story. Or he could fight the void entities himself, probably making everything worse, but at least going down swinging. Jinwoo chose option 3, which wasn't on the multiple choice test, but seemed like the most sensible approach. He would help close the void rift, prove that his abilities could solve problems instead of just creating them, and negotiate a better arrangement with the Balance Council. Arya thought this was either brilliant or suicidal, possibly both. They reached the void rift just as the situation escalated from catastrophic to apocalyptic. The tear in reality stretched across 3 city blocks, and through it poured entities that hurt to look at directly. They moved like liquid nightmares, shifting between forms that suggested geometry had developed a drinking problem. Government forces were retreating in full panic mode, their weapons passing harmlessly through enemies that existed in too many dimensions simultaneously. Jinwoo assessed the situation with the kind of tactical analysis that would have impressed military strategists if they hadn't been busy evacuating. The void entities weren't just alien. They operated on principles that directly contradicted the laws governing his own abilities. Where his system created infinite possibilities, they represented absolute negation. Fighting them would require techniques that didn't exist in any martial arts manual. Jinwoo activated his skill creation ability, something the system had mentioned, but he'd never needed to use. The interface opened up like a cosmic toolbox, offering him the chance to design entirely new techniques specifically adapted to this threat. Existence Anchor would let him maintain his reality in the face of deletion effects. Dimensional Lock could force the entities into a single layer of existence where they could be damaged. Reality Storm would weaponize the fundamental forces that held the universe together. Each technique required massive amounts of energy and computational power that should have fried his brain instantly. Instead, Jinwoo felt his consciousness expand, touching the underlying code that governed existence itself. He wasn't just using abilities anymore. He was rewriting the rules of engagement on a cosmic scale. The system's warnings about power overload became increasingly frantic, then suddenly stopped as if giving up on the concept of limitations entirely. The first void entity he engaged moved like intelligent darkness, reaching out with tendrils that erased matter at the atomic level. Jinwoo met it with Existence Anchor, creating a bubble of reinforced reality around himself, then followed up with a reality storm that tore the creature apart at the conceptual level. The backlash from the technique created a light show visible from space. More entities poured through the rift, each one adapting to his previous attacks in real time. Jinwoo responded by creating new techniques faster than they could evolve defenses. Quantum Fist attacked on multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. Temporal Shear weaponized the flow of time itself. Causal Loop created attack patterns that struck before he'd even thrown the punch. The battle became a showcase in applied impossibility. Jinwoo fought creatures that existed outside normal space-time while standing in downtown Seoul, used abilities that should have required the energy output of small stars, and did it all while maintaining enough control to avoid accidentally deleting the city he was trying to save. Arya watched from a safe distance, her communication device recording everything for the Balance Council archives. She realized they weren't dealing with a rogue awakened human anymore. Jinwoo had evolved into something that transcended conventional classification. He was becoming a force of nature with a human face and surprisingly good manners. The Void Rift began destabilizing as Jinwoo's attacks disrupted the entity's connection to their home dimension. But closing it required one final technique that would push even his broken system beyond its theoretical limits. Jinwoo created Absolute Severance, a ability designed to cut the dimensional tear itself and seal it permanently. The technique required him to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, while channeling enough energy to power a small civilization. The system's warnings reached new levels of panic before simply displaying a message that read, "Error. User capabilities exceed measurement parameters. Switching to survival mode." Reality twisted around Jinwoo as he activated Absolute Severance. For a moment that stretched across eternity, he existed as pure will, imposing order on chaos. The Void Rift screamed as it collapsed, the sound of dimensions folding back on themselves in ways that made mathematicians weep. When the light faded, the rift was gone. The city remained intact. The void entities had been banished back to whatever conceptual nightmare they called home. Jinwoo stood in the center of a perfectly circular crater, steam rising from his clothes but otherwise unharmed. Arya approached cautiously, like someone approaching a tiger that might or might not be domesticated. Her readings showed energy signatures that belonged in theoretical physics textbooks, not walking around wearing jeans and a t-shirt. The Balance Council would need to completely revise their threat assessment protocols. Jinwoo checked his system interface, half expecting to find error messages or warnings about permanent damage. Instead, he found new skill categories unlocking. Abilities that dealt with concepts like dimensional manipulation and reality enforcement. The system had apparently decided that if it was going to be broken, it might as well be comprehensively broken. The immediate crisis was over, but Jinwoo knew this was just the beginning. His abilities were still growing, still evolving, still attracting attention from forces that viewed the universe as their personal playground. The Balance Council would want answers he didn't have. Other organizations would want to study him, recruit him, or eliminate him. And somewhere in the cosmic background, entities far worse than void creatures were beginning to take notice of the reality breaker who just announced his presence to the multiverse with all the subtlety of a nuclear explosion. Jinwoo's apartment building had been mysteriously upgraded to government-grade security overnight. Cameras that looked expensive enough to fund small countries watched every entrance. Black SUVs with tinted windows parked strategically around the block. Men in suits who definitely weren't selling insurance lingered near coffee shops with the kind of casual alertness that screamed federal training. The landlord knocked on Jin Woo's door at exactly 8 in the morning, accompanied by a woman in a sharp business suit who introduced herself as Director Kim from the Hunter Registration Bureau. She had the kind of smile that suggested cooperation wasn't really optional, and the paperwork to make resistance very expensive. Director Kim explained the situation with bureaucratic efficiency that would have impressed tax collectors. Jin Woo's recent activities had triggered mandatory registration protocols. His power level required special classification. The government needed to establish official contact procedures before other interested parties decided to handle things less diplomatically. Jin Woo invited them in because arguing with federal agents in the hallway seemed like the kind of thing that ended with uncomfortable headlines. Director Kim produced a tablet displaying forms that looked like they'd been designed by lawyers who'd given up on human comprehension. Registration documents, liability waivers, emergency contact protocols, and something called a catastrophic event response agreement. The questions started simple enough. Name, age, occupation, next of kin. Then they got creative. Estimated maximum destructive output, preferred method of conflict resolution, psychological stability assessment, willingness to cooperate with government operations. Jin Woo answered honestly, which made Director Kim's expression increasingly concerned. His power level reading broke their measurement equipment twice before they gave up and wrote unmeasurable in the appropriate box. The psychological evaluation consisted of asking if he had any plans to destroy civilization and accepting his not particularly as sufficient documentation. The emergency contact section required 3 different people who could theoretically talk him out of ending the world. Jin Woo realized he didn't actually know 3 people well enough to trust them with cosmic-level crisis management. His social circle consisted of his elderly landlord, a convenience store clerk who remembered his usual order, and technically Aria from the Balance Council if you counted professional assassins as friends. Director Kim suggested they could provide government-approved contacts if necessary, which sounded ominous enough to make Jin Woo reconsider his life choices. The registration process continued with equipment tests that involved measuring his abilities under controlled conditions. They'd prepared a testing facility that looked like a cross between a scientific laboratory and a bunker designed to contain nuclear accidents. The first test measured basic physical capabilities. Punch this reinforced steel plate, lift this weighted bar, run this obstacle course. Jin Woo held back significantly and still shattered equipment that was supposedly rated for S-rank hunters. The technicians kept upgrading their testing materials until they ran out of substances that existed on the periodic table. Combat simulations came next. Holographic enemies that moved with programmed intelligence, simulated scenarios based on real monster encounters, stress tests designed to find his breaking point. Jin Woo fought projections of dragons, armies of demons, cosmic horrors that looked like they'd escaped from nightmares, with advanced degrees in mathematics. The simulation controllers kept increasing difficulty levels, adding more enemies, upgrading their capabilities, stacking environmental hazards. Jinwoo responded by treating it like a particularly elaborate video game, chaining techniques together in combinations that made the programmers question their understanding of physics. After he cleared a scenario designed for a full team of S-rank hunters in under 90 seconds, they stopped pretending the tests were measuring anything meaningful. Director Kim made notes that probably translated to "send bigger forms" and moved on to the practical application section. This part focused on how Jinwoo's abilities could be utilized for national security purposes, disaster response, monster suppression, international cooperation, the kind of responsibilities that came with being classified as a strategic national asset. The job description read like a cross between superhero and nuclear deterrent. Jinwoo listened to proposals about joining elite hunter teams, participating in international peacekeeping operations, and serving as a rapid response unit for dimensional incursions. The benefits package included a government salary, housing allowances, medical coverage, and legal immunity for property damage during official operations. The unofficial benefits, Director Kim explained with the kind of smile that suggested classified information, included protection from organizations that might view him as a threat, access to government resources for power development, and coordination with international agencies that dealt with reality-level problems. Jinwoo asked what happened if he declined their generous offer. Director Kim's smile became the sort that appeared in corporate training videos about handling difficult customers. Declining wasn't really an option, she explained. His power level made him a matter of national security. They could offer cooperation or supervision, but ignoring him wasn't feasible. The conversation was interrupted by alarm that sounded like the building's fire safety system had developed anxiety disorders. Red lights flashed, automated voices announced emergency protocols, and through the facility's reinforced windows, Jinwoo could see aircraft approaching with the kind of urgency that suggested bad news was arriving ahead of schedule. Director Kim's radio crackled with reports that made her expression shift from bureaucratic confidence to professional concern. Multiple dimensional rifts opening simultaneously across 3 different cities. Unprecedented monster classifications emerging from tiers in reality. Hunter teams requesting immediate backup against entities that weren't responding to conventional suppression techniques. The timing was suspicious enough to make conspiracy theorists weep with joy. Jinwoo's registration testing had apparently triggered something, or someone had been waiting for him to be conveniently contained in a government facility. Either way, the situation was escalating faster than a social media controversy. Jinwoo stood up, straightening his clothes with the kind of calm that suggested he'd been expecting this development. Director Kim started to object, mentioning protocols and procedures and the importance of following proper channels during crisis situations. Jinwoo politely explained that people were dying while they discussed paperwork. The facility's security systems activated as Jinwoo approached the exit, blast doors sealing with mechanical finality. Director Kim apologized for the inconvenience, but explained that containing him during active dimensional incursions was standard safety protocol. Jinwoo looked at the reinforced barriers designed to hold S-rank monsters and sighed with the patience of someone who dealt with bureaucracy before. Dimensional lock bypassed the blast doors by temporarily existing in a layer of reality where solid barriers were more like suggestions. Jin Woo stepped through the wall like it was made of morning mist, leaving Director Kim staring at empty air and probably reconsidering her career choices. The aircraft outside were military transports loading hunter teams for emergency deployment. Jin Woo approached the nearest pilot and politely requested transportation to the crisis zones. The pilot, who'd obviously been briefed about the facility's important guest, agreed with the kind of nervous respect usually reserved for armed explosives. During the flight, Jin Woo reviewed situation reports that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. The dimensional rifts weren't random tears in reality. They were coordinated breaches designed to stretch response forces thin. Each rift spewed different types of entities, forcing hunters to adapt to multiple threat profiles simultaneously. The first rift produced crystalline spiders the size of buses, creatures that could phase through solid matter and reassemble on the other side. The second spawned shadow wraiths that fed on electrical energy, plunging entire city blocks into darkness. The third birthed something called probability devourers that made cause and effect more like vague guidelines. Hunter teams were struggling against enemies that operated outside conventional tactical frameworks. Weapons that should have been effective passed harmlessly through targets that existed partially in other dimensions. Abilities that had worked against previous monster types failed against entities that rewrote local physics as a defensive mechanism. Jin Woo studied the tactical reports while considering response strategies. These weren't random monster attacks. Someone was testing response capabilities, probing for weaknesses in the dimensional defense systems. The coordination required sophisticated intelligence about Earth's supernatural defenses. The transport aircraft shuddered as they approached the first crisis zone. Through the windows, Jinwoo could see a city under siege by creatures that looked like geometric nightmares with too many angles. Buildings twisted into impossible configurations where the spiders had passed through them, leaving architecture that hurt to look at directly. Hunter teams on the ground were falling back in organized retreats, their conventional tactics useless against enemies that could phase through cover and attacks simultaneously. Radio chatter filled with increasingly desperate requests for backup, heavier weapons, anything that could actually damage entities that existed in multiple dimensional layers. Jinwoo activated phase synchronization, a new technique he developed during the government testing. It allowed him to exist in the same dimensional frequencies as the spiders, making them vulnerable to physical attacks. The transport pilot received clearance for emergency deployment and opened the cargo doors at 3,000 feet. Free falling through the air gave Jinwoo time to prepare technique combinations specifically adapted to each enemy type. Crystalline disruption would shatter the spider's phasing abilities. Electrical absorption could neutralize the Shadow Wraith's energy feeding. Causality enforcement would restore proper cause and effect relationships against the probability devourers. He landed in the middle of the spider infestation like a meteor with anger management issues. The impact crater stretched across half a city block, and the shock wave shattered every piece of glass within a quarter-mile radius. The spiders, who'd been systematically destroying everything in their path, suddenly found themselves facing something that could hurt them back. Jinwoo moved through the crystalline horde like he was conducting a symphony of destruction. Each spider he touched with phase synchronization became solid enough to receive the full force of his other abilities. Quantum strikes hit them across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. Structural collapse turned their crystalline bodies into expensive gravel. The hunter teams regrouped behind his advancing position, their weapons suddenly effective against enemies that Jinwoo had forced back into normal reality. Radio chatter shifted from panic to amazement as the tide of battle reversed in real time. Within 15 minutes, the first crisis zone was cleared. Jinwoo didn't pause to accept congratulations. The second rift was still active, and shadow wraiths were draining power from critical infrastructure across the city. He activated teleportation network, a technique that let him move instantly between dimensional anchor points he'd established during previous battles. The shadow wraith infestation had turned the second city into something resembling a medieval nightmare with modern architecture. Streetlights died in spreading waves of darkness. Electronic devices failed as their energy was consumed by hungry shadows. Emergency services struggled to coordinate responses without reliable communication systems. Jinwoo arrived in the center of the affected area and immediately understood the tactical problem. The wraiths were incorporeal, feeding on electrical energy while remaining immune to physical attacks. Conventional hunter techniques relied heavily on energy-based abilities, which only made the creatures stronger. Energy conversion solved the problem with typical system elegance. Instead of trying to starve the wraiths, Jinwoo became a more attractive power source. Every shadow creature in the area turned toward him like moths drawn to the world's most dangerous flame. Then he activated feedback loop. The wraiths that tried to drain his energy found themselves connected to the infinite power system that fueled his abilities. They began absorbing energy at rates that exceeded their capacity to process it, overloading their incorporeal forms until they burst like supernatural balloons. The feedback effect spread through their entire population in cascading chain reactions. City lights flickered back on as the wraiths were eliminated, electronic systems rebooted, communication networks restored themselves, and the hunter teams coordinated a systematic sweep to ensure no shadow creatures remained hidden in the infrastructure. 2 down, 1 to go. The third rift presented the most complex challenge because probability devourers didn't just fight their enemies. They made reality itself unreliable in their presence. Weapons jammed at critical moments, defensive abilities failed randomly, and tactical plans collapsed as cause and effect became suggestions rather than laws. Jinwoo approached the final crisis zone with techniques specifically designed for enemies that cheated at existence itself. Absolute certainty created zones where probability manipulation couldn't function. Causal reinforcement restored proper cause and effect relationships. Deterministic field ensured that his abilities would work regardless of external reality manipulation. The battle against the probability devourers became a philosophical argument conducted with applied violence. They tried to make his attacks miss by manipulating chance. He responded by creating attacks that existed outside probability mechanics. They attempted to make their defenses randomly effective. He countered with techniques that bypassed defensive concepts entirely. Reality stabilized around Jinwoo like he was carrying his own personal physics engine. His techniques worked with mathematical precision, while the Devourers found their probability manipulation abilities increasingly ineffective. Within the sphere of his influence, the universe remembered how to function properly. The cleanup took another hour, but the crisis was officially resolved. Three-dimensional rifts closed, multiple exotic entity types eliminated, civilian casualties minimized through rapid response. Jinwoo stood in the ruins of what had been a coordinated attack on three major cities and wondered who had the resources to orchestrate something this sophisticated. His phone buzzed with a message from Director Kim. Congratulations on successful crisis resolution. Please report to debriefing facility for evaluation and discussion of permanent employment arrangements. Failure to comply will result in administrative consequences. Jinwoo looked at the message, then at the destroyed cityscape around him, then back at the message. He was beginning to understand that having reality-breaking powers came with reality-breaking responsibilities. The universe had a sense of humor, and apparently it involved a lot of paperwork. The debriefing facility turned out to be less facility and more underground bunker that had delusions of grandeur. Jinwoo descended through security checkpoints that scanned everything from his DNA to his dimensional resonance frequency. The walls were lined with metal that hummed with suppression enchantments, because apparently the government had learned not to take chances with reality benders. Director Kim waited in a conference room that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought intimidation was an interior decorating philosophy. The table was large enough to land aircraft on, surrounded by chairs that screamed authority, and screens displaying data that probably cost more than most people's houses. Three other individuals sat at strategic positions around the table, each radiating the kind of professional competence that suggested they'd seen things that would make nightmares file for unemployment. The introductions were crisp and efficient. General Morrison from the Military Supernatural Division, a man whose handshake could probably crack walnuts, and whose stare suggested he'd personally wrestled demons for sport. Dr. Chen from the Dimensional Research Institute, a woman whose lab coat somehow looked like battle armor and whose eyes held the kind of knowledge that came from staring into cosmic horrors until they blinked first. Agent Park from International Cooperation, who smiled like someone who knew 17 different ways to make problems disappear and had diplomatic immunity for all of them. And there you have it. Jinwoo went from being about as threatening as a soggy sandwich to becoming the kind of reality-breaking powerhouse that makes the universe itself reach for aspirin. With zero cooldowns, infinite combos, and the ability to one-shot enemies that should require entire armies to defeat, he's basically turned existence into his personal cheat code playground. The manhwa takes the concept of overpowered protagonists and cranks it to 11, then breaks the dial off for good measure. If you enjoyed watching someone absolutely demolish the laws of physics with style, hit that like button and subscribe for more manhwa madness that'll make your brain question everything. It thought it knew about power scaling.